We came here to Palestine to stand in love and revolutionary struggle with our brothers and sisters. We come to a land that has been stolen by greed and destroyed by hate. We come here and we learn laws that have been co-signed in ink but written in the blood of the innocent. And we stand next to people who continue to courageously struggle and resist the occupation. People who continue to dream and fight for freedom. From Ferguson to Palestine, the struggle for freedom continues.
1, 2, 3,
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it's won.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it's won. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it's won.
We sit in a sea of settlements while the sound of suffering sails, lost in the listening as the voices of heartache hail. The power of presence, people as portals, passports to heaven. Here is a protest in the form of a prayer. God is in the holy water lining the lower lids of Ali's eyes. A tear, a river against a cheek. Waiting in old Jerusalem, sitting on a leaning chair in the market, the lonely storyteller. God is a woman holding a crying baby in her arms at a checkpoint in Ramallah, waiting at the gates like cattle. God is in the rubble, gnarled hands rinsing in an open fire, a journey of dreamers singing through empty streets in Bethlehem. We survive in the telling, unafraid we survive in the telling, we survive. Watan badun shab wa shab badun watan. We survive.
What if occupation's a dream the Palestinians had? Krills underneath their teeth and they suddenly relapsed. Saw the ships at the bay of the West Bank shore. Woke up and the occupation existed no more. What if Zionism is the second coming of Christ? Destruction is the matrimony in sight, because if we are the Messiah, then God is not white. What if life is the afterlife and we already dead? The footage of the moment replayed in your head, looping over until you die for the second time. What if power influence your intelligence and mind, and those with the lesser are really the oppressors, but you still steal this land under that pressure? Free Palestine.
Palestine to Ferguson, in the occupation. Ferguson to Palestine, we fight to free our nations. Palestine to Ferguson, in the occupation. Ferguson to Palestine, we fight to save our nation. Palestine to Ferguson, in the occupation. Ferguson to Palestine, we fight to save our nation.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you all so much for joining us for our first webinar of this iteration of Black for Palestine. My name is Sierra Taylor, she, they, pronouns. I was honored to be a part of that delegation in 2015 with the Dream Defenders, Black Youth Project 100, and many others. I'm very honored again to be here with you all tonight. As we open up, I want to first say thank you to Vernice and Rodney, who will be our ASL interpreters for this evening. They are with Accessible Integrated Media. I also want to give a shout out to Paige and Christian from the Movement for Black Lives for holding us down with tech tonight. Aisha, who worked on the beautiful slides that we will see throughout tonight's session. And Charlene Carruthers, who isn't able to join us, but who really helped us in putting tonight's program together. Just wanting everyone to know that there really was a community that came together to think about tonight's session. And so you could be anywhere in the world right now, but you're here with us and we appreciate it. We wanted to open up with a couple of spiritual offerings because the moment that we're in, this crisis that we're in, can bring up a lot for all of us. And it's super important that we take time and take stock of the moments of spirit and connection that we have in our community. And so I would like to invite our dear brother, Gerald Lenore, poet and activist, to open us up with a poem this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ciara. Appreciate it. It was a very powerful opening with that video and really set the tone for what we're about to discuss. I'm going to read a poem that I wrote in 1984. And in 1984, I lived in Seattle, Washington. And the poem really is a poem about police brutality and the murder of Robert Baldwin by the police in Seattle. But in the poem, it really goes to then solidarity across the globe. And one of those places is Palestine. And another context is that in 1984, I was the floor leader for the King County Democratic Party convention for the Jesse Jackson campaign. And in that campaign, we put forward a resolution that said that the PLO was the sole legitimate representative of the people of Palestine. We put it forward because we wanted to test the waters. That resolution did not pass at that convention, but it lost by 5 votes. And so in 1984, in Seattle at least, there was a lot of empathy and support for the Palestinian cause. This poem is called Target Seattle, Soweto, San Salvador, and was written in protest of the machine gun murder of Robert Baldwin by Seattle policemen on March 28, 1984. Rat-a-tat-tat, 21 bullets in Baldwin's back. No right to home, no right to life. Out of work, a victim of racial strife. Judged and executed on the spot, 21 bullets is the sentence he got. So Baldwin died and the policeman lied. The inquest verdict, justifiable homicide. Rat-a-tat-tat, run for cover if you're poor or black. Affirmative action shot down in the halls of justice. Racism rising as the policemen bust us. White supremacy is still the law of the land, and we are still the targets of the Nazis and the Klan. So still we die, and still they lie, that racism is not the reason why. Rat-a-tat-tat, Nicaragua, Angola under attack. Imperialist bullets making their hit, waging war on the people to protect private profit. Namibia and Palestine illegally occupied. Sabra and Shatila, where the innocent died. So the innocent died and Reagan lied, and Israel continues its genocide. Rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat, the sound of the people fighting back. FMLN, PLO, we still have a long, long way to go. And we who live within the belly of the beast must struggle for justice, equality, and peace, targeting this system that exploits the poor, taking aim at its pillars of racism and war, from Seattle to Soweto to San Salvador. And if we must die, let us at least know why. Let freedom be our battle cry. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let freedom be our battle cry. And next, I want to introduce my dear sister. It's so funny. I'm sure many of you all are having this experience in this moment where you're out in the streets and you're organizing in this rapid response moment, and you meet people, and for some reason you've only known each other for about a month or a month and a half, and mostly through phone, but you feel this kinship and connection. And I definitely feel that with our next speaker, Asmira Hamori Davis. She is a Black and Palestinian scholar, practitioner, organizer, and poet with Black Christians for Palestine. Thank you so much, Asmira, for giving us a word this evening to start us out.
Thank you so much for having me. Greetings, everyone. Good evening. Peace be unto you wherever you are calling in from. Deeply grateful to the people, to the Tongva people upon whose land I sit. And this evening, my heart's been really on the highs and the lows, trying to discern what is it that Spirit would have me share with you all today. And I was brought to a journal entry, brought back to, because I am a person who grew up as a child of God, first and foremost, knowing that we, across every nation, tongue, color, and creed, at our core, we bleed the same, we cry the same, we love the same, we hug the same, we touch the same, we feel the same, we kiss the same, we miss the same. And in the book of Hebrews 11:11, a text that continues to remind me that in moments like this, when massacres continue, when we are waiting for a permanent ceasefire and told that we have to hold our breath for a few trucks of humanitarian aid to come in, and that the second we begin to muster a cry of resistance, that we are deemed terrorists, we know that God is on our side. For we are told that faith, whatever faith that may be that you practice, faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you do not see. And so this passage was written on the 5th day of November before going to bed. And it says, "Dear God, my heart is breaking and I'm feeling numb, wondering if the words will ever come. The sky is falling and the air is frail. How long must they live in this oppressive hell? My mind is racing, yet thoughts, they won't come out. Why don't they seem to hear us when we shout? Homes are demolished, lives are destroyed. What good is left in this here void? While the narrative war rages on, as the apartheid state drops every bomb and the US government claps as if they can do no wrong. What a sad, pitiful, shameful song. But the people gather, they still gather, and the masses, they still draw near. Together we lift our voices, casting away every single fear, for God sees every single tear. As the helplessness settles into our bones, we say we need not journey. We need not journey this part alone. So we pick up the phone. We pick up the phone. We pick up the phone. Not the US president sanctioning another drone with our tax dollars. You tell me, what would you do if this was your home? We continue to pick up the phone. And so as we gather and as we enter into the second month of this bombardment, but truly the 75th year, honoring the people of Palestine for resisting for 75 years, I want to thank my ancestors, Munira Hamouri, Suher Hamouri. I want to thank the ancestors that continue to open up spaces to speak, to honor and to learn what it means to live, what it means to be free, and what it means to resist. May we press on.
Girl, you had my whole ass contact fall out. Thank you. Wow, thank you so much. That was so beautiful. I want to pass it to another sister comrade who have also, we've been in these planning meetings together, but finally got to do a sort of one-on-one call last week. And this sister has such a beautiful spirit and you're so powerful. So I'm going to pass it over to Yasmina Price to give us a bit of an overview of this beautiful and powerful history that is Black and Palestinian solidarity. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Today, which is the International Day of Solidarity with the People of Palestine, I'm going to get us started with a little bit on the historical ties between Black liberation and Palestinian liberation. And we call this solidarity, but I think that word and that idea is an important place to start. There's a really incredible interview with Robin D.G. Kelley, a scholar of Black freedom, from 2020, where he does speak significantly about the Palestinian struggle, but also offers so much political clarity around what solidarity is and what it isn't. And what ends up being the title of that published interview, which if you Google it is immediately available, is where he says, solidarity is not a market exchange, meaning that it's obviously not a thing that's bought and sold. It's not a transaction. He makes a really important point that solidarity is not empathy. It's not sympathy. It's also not pity. It's not about feeling bad for others suffering in general or suffering the way you do. It's not about some kind of compare and contrast of oppression. In naming solidarity, we are not trying to prove compatible suffering to each other. We don't need to have had exactly the same experiences. And so then what is solidarity? One way we can look at it is that what it is a commitment to refusing these global conditions, these conditions where exploitation, oppression, and structural violence are not only acceptable, but they are required for the world to function this way. The way that the global order has been organized, this whole thing, through brutal hierarchies, through slavery, colonization, imperialism, and capitalism, means that the same things stand in the way of Black liberation as stand in the way of Palestinian liberation. And for all of our peoples, the thing that is denied and is taken away and is stolen over and over is what we could call sovereignty. We could call it self-determination. We could call it autonomy. We could call it freedom. We could call it the right to have rights, to be able to live without a boot on your neck, without it being more likely that you will die at the hands of the state, with every dominant system of power lined up to support that. And we cannot live without our lives. And this gathering tonight and these past few weeks of increasingly active Black and Palestinian solidarity organizing, this is on the shoulders of inherited battles. And most clearly, during the time of the decolonization struggles across across the now global South and then the Third World, And that phase of the rise of Black internationalism in the 1960s, along with all the anti-war movements in the US due to something which should not be called the Vietnam War, but should be called the American War in Vietnam, and overlapping also with all of the freedom-making activities in apartheid South Africa. So that was a high moment, the 1960s. But also a little bit earlier in 1948 was the War of Palestine, where the land of Palestinians went from being under the control of British colonizers in what was called the Mandate System to being violently stolen by the State of Israel, which was created in that year, in 1948. It is not older than that. And 1948 was also the year of the Nakba, when Palestinians were expelled from their home, 78% of their land was taken. And when we look ahead a little bit from 1948 to 1967, we have the Six-Day War, when Israel then went on to seize the West Bank and also to seize parts of Gaza. And it was here that there was a turning point, because at the beginning, in terms of Black freedom struggles based in the US, there actually had been support for the Zionist project, but 67 is where this changes. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the SNCC, declared support for Palestinians. A few years later, in 1970, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense also took a firm pro-Palestinian stance as part of an international vision of solidarity against colonialism, imperialism, and white supremacy. But even that is not quite the beginning, because there had been earlier points of connection with a group who is often forgotten, even in these conversations, who could either be called Afro-Palestinians or Black Palestinians, who had been in Jerusalem dating as far back as the 19th century. And that community has played a really important role in Palestinian liberation struggles, especially after that shift in 1967. This is not the only connection. On the African continent in the 60s and 70s, there were efforts that also tied all of this to Pan-Africanism. In 1969, there was the Pan-African Cultural Festival in Algeria, and it had pro-Palestine resolutions at both the Black Power and the New Left summits. A few years later, in 1974, when the Pan-African Congress met in Tanzania, they saw Palestine, similarly to the way the Black Panthers did, as an integral part of a worldwide struggle. And during the 1970s was also a time where many African and Caribbean countries ended diplomatic ties with Israel. And freedom fighters in places like Mozambique saw that Palestinians fighting for what would have to be our shared liberations were also their comrades. This was also a time where Israel had ties with oppressive forces on the African continent. There were economic as well as political links between the Zionist state, apartheid South Africa, and also with some involvement with Portuguese colonialism. And South Africa under apartheid is really important here, because there's something that it makes very, very clear, which is the thing that ties South Africa, the United States, and Israel together, which makes them the best of friends, even though SA has changed since the apartheid period, is that all of them are settler colonies. All of them are states which were formed by stealing land from others. And that's how settler colonialism works. It's when foreign settlers arrive in a territory that is already inhabited. It's not being discovered. It's not brand new. They come in and they take people's homes and they take over and they impose their own society on top of it, which is to say that one thing that has been really fundamental either from those earlier historical moments, which is also still central to the connection between Black liberation and Palestinian liberation, is the question of land and also the question of anti-colonialism. These have to be anti-colonial struggles. And that is solidarity. It's not a favor that one group is doing for another. None of us are going to get out of this as long as the structures of power that were created through the greedy brutalities of colonization keep shaping our present and keep shaping our future. Even if colonialism might not look as evident on the surface as it did during formal colonization or even during the 1960s, it's no less relevant to the kind of fights that we're waging now. And if we look forward a little bit, but still a ways back, before these past couple of months, the last strong episode of Black and Palestinian solidarity was in 2015 and 2014. Israel then waged a 50-day war on Gaza, and there were the uprisings in Ferguson, which sparked mass action and the movement for Black lives. This was a time of the renewal of transnational solidarity, of political education, of shared actions. As we saw in that first video, American delegations to Palestine, recognizing the linkages between US and Israel in terms of state violence and the use of carcerality. What we've also seen over the past month is that many have been drawing the connections between what is happening in the Sudan, what is happening in Congo, what is happening in Haiti, and what is happening in Gaza. And again, we have legacies and continuations of colonization. And in many of them, we also see the shared enemy that is American imperialism and American militarism. These continuing endless wars, which always have profit as one of their motivations, which include ongoing occupations and constant intervention by the American army, or something that wears the false face of so-called aid, so-called development, so-called philanthropy. These are never solutions to a problem. These are part of the problem. And from the 1960s to 2014 to now, something that is clear that keeps provoking either new or renewed forms of Black and Palestinian solidarity is that they are tied to when there are these moments of increased American aggression and warmongering, whether it's fighting a war directly or, as is happening right now, funding and legitimizing it. And so if we can see that white supremacy and colonialism and imperialism and capitalism are the things that are standing in the way of Black liberation, then we see that the same things are what prevent Palestinian liberation. We are not oppressed in exactly the same ways, and maybe we do not want exactly the same things, but we are very much in this together, and there is no path forward that does not also have to be a deep-seated fundamental challenge to undoing all of those systems of domination. We can have clarity that this conspiracy of global capital, of militarized neocolonialism, or we could just call it colonialism, of bloodthirsty imperialism, that is also the clarity from which we can fight for a different future.
Well, all right, Yasmina. That was incredible. I wasn't expecting all of that. That was amazing. Thank you so much. And again, shout out to Aisha Farley for the slides. I know we're getting into the program. Charlene Carruthers for helping us sort this thing out. Rodney for the incredible interpretation, braids and nails. And then next, we're going to invite one of the smartest people I know, and also like super chill. We're going to invite Curry Peterson Smith to just bring us up to date with where things are with Black for Palestine. Yes, and shout out Barbara Smith. Barbara Smith is in the chat. Barbara Smith has been recovering from the flu. I hope you're feeling better. Thank you so much for being on and just for always being with us. Thank you.
Barbara Smith is in the building, along with such incredible people. Just endless gratitude for all the people who made this possible, all of you all for joining us, this richness that my co-panelists are bringing to us. And so I'm going to begin my remarks. You know, Yasmina talked about the kind of vast ocean of Black and Palestine solidarity. The beginning of my remarks are about a little piece of that, which is the emergence of Black for Palestine as a project. And Yasmina made my job easy because she talked about the moment in which this particular project emerged. which really started in 2014. It was that fateful summer in which it began with the police killing of Eric Garner, and the police murder of Michael Brown, and the Ferguson uprising happened, and that coincided with the latest Israeli bombardment of Gaza. And that bombardment, as Yasmina said, lasted for 50 days. More than 2,300 people were killed, Palestinians were killed in that bombardment, more than 10,000 wounded. And it coincided with the Ferguson uprising, which meant that if you were watching the news in the US, on national news, they would be talking about what happened in Ferguson that day. And then on world news, they would be talking about what happened in Gaza that day. And there's a lot to say about that moment. Not only, of course, were we so proud of the rebels of Ferguson, but it's also the case that from the very start, from jump, Palestinians were with us supporting that rebellion. There were Palestinians and Palestinian Americans in the streets of Ferguson in those protests, and then Palestinians in Palestine sent messages of solidarity. There were multiple statements of solidarity from Palestinians in Palestine, as well as statements on social media shouting out the Ferguson Rebellion, giving us advice about how to deal with tear gas and things like that. So that's what happened in 2014. And that's when Christian Davis Bailey and I, my dear comrade Christian, talked about making a statement in solidarity with Palestine because, like I said, there were multiple statements from Palestinians in solidarity with the Black freedom struggle here. We said, well, we need to return, return the solidarity. And so the project began in 2014, but that year, that fall, there was such a powerful wave of struggle for Black lives in response to the non-indictments of the murderers of Eric Garner and Mike Brown. So there was tons of protests, and of course we jumped into that protest, and we decided to release our statement of Black solidarity with Palestine in 2015 to coincide with the anniversary of the Israeli bombardment. And while at first we were, felt a little bad because it took us a year to put out the statement, it actually ended up being a blessing because, as Yasmina spoke to and as this webinar began with, there was the historic delegation of the Dream Defenders, a Black and Palestinian delegation from the US to Palestine in 2015, among multiple Black delegations to Palestine, among multiple exchanges and connections that were forged actually in the year between the summers of 2014 and 2015. And so when we actually put out the statement, it resonated in a much deeper way after a year of building. And more than 1,100 Black folks, artists, writers, activists, workers signed that statement. And it was really out of that we created Black for Palestine. So that's a little bit of that. And so grateful and honored to be part of the latest configuration of Black for Palestine, which we have reconstituted in this moment of horror in Gaza. And that's what I want to turn to now is really a policy update about what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in Washington and the relationship of the movement to all that. So first, just a word about what's happening in Palestine itself. I'm not going to get into detail about the unfathomable human toll because folks know, more than 15,000 Palestinians in Gaza killed, many, many more wounded, 1.7 million displaced. And this is just in Gaza. There is a crackdown all across historic Palestine right now, including within what Israel claims as its borders, as well as in the West Bank. One thing to note that the Israeli forces have added to their siege of Gaza just in recent weeks is not only are they displacing people in Gaza from the north to the south of the Gaza Strip, but they're also detaining people as they're displacing them. So it's not just that they're forcing folks to leave northern Gaza. They've set up checkpoints that Palestinians have to pass through, and they are detaining people as well and bringing them into Israeli prisons. So that's happening. With that, turning to this place called the United States, the key goal, of course, is ceasefire, allowing humanitarian relief to flow freely, and demanding no further displacement of Palestinians. And shout out to our fam from Gaza, who has been very clear in guiding us in terms of what those demands should be. Those are the goals. The strategy is to pressure the US federal government, Congress, and the White House to call for a ceasefire. And that is because everything that Israel is doing, it does with the knowledge that it has the full backing of the United States in the form of weapons and funding to pay for those weapons, the diplomatic support. It's the US who vetoes those ceasefire resolutions in the UN Security Council. It's the US who votes against ceasefire resolutions in the UN General Assembly. We should remember that after the October 7th attacks on Israelis, the Israeli defense minister called Palestinians in Gaza human animals, his words, and then announced that all food, water, electricity, and fuel would be cut off from Gaza. Now, this rhetoric, human animals, is deeply dehumanizing, and this policy of cutting off essential needs of Gaza is not only unethical, it's actually a violation of international law, which states that occupying forces have the responsibility to make sure that the basic human needs of the population they occupy are provided for. What was the US response to this dehumanizing rhetoric and open, televised announcement that its key ally would be violating international law in real time? The response was first the Secretary of State, then the Secretary of Defense, and lastly, the President himself of the United States flying to Tel Aviv to literally embrace the Israeli head of state. In other words, a full US endorsement of these violations. So, once again, everything Israel is doing, they know they have the support of the US, and that's why demanding a ceasefire, demanding that US officials call for a ceasefire, is so important, because if the US did that, this war would stop. Now, at the moment, 49 members of Congress are calling for a ceasefire. It started with 18 members. Okay, it's gone from 18 to 49. Not nearly what we need, and yet this shows that what we collectively as a movement have been doing is working. The calls and the emails to members of Congress, the sit-ins, the marches, the student walkouts, the many, many forms of protest and direct action, they are all working. When organizations that do Palestine advocacy started pushing for ceasefire 6 weeks ago, members of Congress staff told us that they were only hearing from constituents supporting Israel. They can no longer say that at all. It's crystal clear where we stand because of the strength of our movement. And it's not just the fact that we are raising our voices, it is the fact that we have and we are exercising something that I would argue the Palestine movement in the US has never actually held in its history, which is power. I won't get into a lengthy discussion of where I think that came from, but suffice it to say that the years of organizing before this October, the Students for Justice in Palestine, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign, the faith-based advocacy, etc., the Palestinian scholars and analysts and journalists asserting themselves in the mainstream media, all of it mattered. And it laid the groundwork for the support for ceasefire and the sympathy with Palestinians that we are seeing today. Whereas the hegemonic conversation in the first 2 weeks after October 7th was about Israel's right to defend itself, we collectively and successfully shifted the conversation to one that cannot ignore Palestinian humanity and in which ceasefire is viewed as the most legitimate policy right now. We have a solid majority, 66% of Americans who want ceasefire and 80% of Democratic voters. We have never had these majorities with us on a Palestine question. It is the White House and Congress who are isolated in supporting Israeli genocide isolated certainly on the world stage, but isolated even here among Americans in the United States. Furthermore, this is an unpopular presidency. Biden desperately needs the support of the Democratic Party voter base, especially young people and people of color, who are the precise demographics that are most likely to support a ceasefire. And this points to our work in Black for Palestine in particular, and all the allies we work with, Movement for Black Lives, Dream Defenders, all our fam fighting for Palestinian rights, and our role in campaigning for Palestinian rights in Black America. This whole situation is leading to a political crisis for Biden and the majority of congressional Democrats who have opposed calls for a ceasefire. Their own staffers are courageously walking out against them. Former staffers and campaigners are writing open letters confronting them. Staff in the State Department are quitting publicly because even people whose work involves approving U.S. weapons transfers, even for them, they can't abide by the level of brazen genocide that Israel is committing out in the open with the adamant support of the United States in both word and deed right now. That is, our movement is so strong that it is actually making its way and penetrating the halls of power themselves. At this moment, of course, there is a pause that has been negotiated to stop the bombing for now, release Israeli hostages being held in Gaza, and Palestinian hostages who are being held in the Israeli prison system by the thousands. Now, this pause shows that, among other things, the negotiations work. They said that Hamas could never be trusted to honor an agreement. And in fact, an agreement has been honored, that Palestinians cannot be trusted to honor an agreement. And in fact, it is being honored. The Israeli government has made it clear that they intend to resume their genocidal bombardment and ground attacks as soon as this pause ends, however. So we should understand that they are gearing up for that. Lastly, just in terms of policy, there is a proposal, folks will know, for a supplemental bill funding for more than $100 billion for Israeli weapons, for NATO and weapons to Ukraine, for weapons to Taiwan, and for fortification and militarization of the US-Mexico border. That vote, that legislation is supposed to be put forward in the next couple of weeks, which are the last 2 weeks of the legislative calendar. So that's all to say, this is a machine that knows how to wage war and is very committed to supporting this genocidal action. And I do believe that we have the power to stop this, but we should be clear about how deep the commitment is on the part of the Israeli and US states to this assault. And it is therefore going to require our strength and our strategy. The good news is that never have we been more powerful, and therefore never has it been more important to be strategic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Curry. We're going to next ask AG and Charlene Carruthers, who will join us. AG and Charlene are both of Black for Palestine. And AG is going to talk about what it is to organize in this moment and give us a bit of a field report. AG's been on the ground, just doing the damn thing. And then we'll have Charlene to talk about what action we can take and what we can do now. Thank you both.
Thank you all so much for having me. And I'll do my best to keep it brief because Curry covered so much of what's made this moment possible, which is people taking ongoing action in the demand for a ceasefire and Palestinian liberation. There's been actions in over 40 countries. Millions of people have taken to the streets, and there's been something happening every single day for 53 days in this demand to actually not just see the bombardment of Gaza but to see an actual solution to the question of whether or not Palestinians deserve human rights. For so long, that conversation has been centered on whether or not another group of people has the monopoly on human rights in the area. And that group of people, Israelis and the Israeli Defense Force, the Israeli Occupation Force, has largely been denying people's human rights. And we have seen people take action like never before across the world to simply say Palestinians are human beings too and deserve to live freely. Now, it's the holiday season. So people are, in different spaces and places with their family. And frankly, that makes it even more urgent right now for us to continue to do the education, continue to take what you've been learning on this webinar, continue to take what you've seen with your own eyes over the last 53 days and really explain to people what is at stake here. Your dollars, if you are a US citizen, if you're a Canadian citizen, if you're a citizen of the West, your dollars are the ones that are going to funding this genocide. It is with our money that people are being murdered in mass. And we need to say that we have a real stake in making sure that this stops and that this ends. Some of the actions that we've seen people take range from just hosting local movie nights in their towns to bird dogging their congresspeople, to sit-ins and occupations from everywhere from Grand Central Station to the Capitol building to the steps outside of the White House. And we've seen people actually start to target the weapons manufacturers who are taking our money, profiting off of this war, profiting off of what's not even fair to call a war, but more accurately, an ethnic cleansing of the land in Palestine. So there are a lot of different ways in which you can get involved, but the first step is to find your people. We have a Black and Palestinian toolkit that B4P co-sponsored and put out, which gives you access to different kinds of tools that you can use in the efforts to organize in your community. If you sign up, you will get access to a coach who can help walk you through how to hold local actions and activities. But finding your people is really critical. Finding B4P, finding Dream Defenders has been a formative experience in how we actually, how I actually been able to organize around Black and Palestinian solidarity. Second, don't be afraid to take a risk. Yes, sometimes standing up in front of your representative, standing up in front of people who we consider to be in power can be nerve-wracking, but with your people alongside of you in real planning, we know that we can actually move folks to the demand around a ceasefire and hopefully to the demand around a Palestinian state, which is decades overdue. Finally, and into the occupation. Finally, don't be afraid to ask questions. So what we're gonna be doing up next is just talking about how people can get involved beyond this toolkit, but it's okay not to have every answer. It's okay not to know every fact. At the end of this day, this boils down to whether or not people deserve basic human rights and self-determination. We know that Black people globally deserve this. We know that Palestinians globally deserve this. We know that Indigenous people globally deserve this. And so we should not be afraid to ask questions, but also to state very clearly that we are here in the demand of human dignity and human rights. With that, I'm going to pass it on along to Charlene.
Hey, y'all. My goodness, what a session we've had with each other this evening. What a time we've spent with each other this evening. I feel extremely honored to be a part of this space. I'm Charlene Carruthers. I'm a member of Black for Palestine, and I am born and raised in what is called Chicago, Illinois, in what is called the United States of America. And what I'm here to offer to everyone tonight is a very clear call to action. AG just shared with us clear action items that anyone can engage in here, to call on our representatives, to be engaged in actions, to speak up, speak out, to write, to be in conversations with our people. What I know for sure is that what motivates us to show up, at least what motivates me to show up in organizing every day, are the stories of everyday people, not just of their stories of dispossession and devastation, but also their stories of refusal and their stories of creation. And I also understand and know that I show up to struggle together, not just because we have connected experiences, but I show up to co-struggle and to be in solidarity with people because I have political commitments to collective liberation. My commitment to solidarity cannot be preconditioned by someone else showing up for me or not showing up for me. But as a Black feminist, as an abolitionist, I know that this is a moment for all people of conscience, particularly Black people of conscience and Black people on their way to being conscious, to show up and take action from the positions in which we sit. If you are a student, engage in conversations on your campus. Make sure your university is on the right side of what is happening here. If you are a clergy member, make sure that your institution is on the right side of this issue, is very clearly anti-Zionist and pro-collective liberation for all people. If you are a cook, if you are a chef, if you are a teacher, if you're an educator, anyone who engages with everyday people on a regular basis, have conversations that are grounded in questions and curiosity about what we all deserve, because we deserve a world in which we can all live in our full dignity and in right relationship with each other and the land and the other beings that we inhabit and that we share this particular planet with. So if you're on this call right now, you're like, you're still like, what is at stake for me? Yes, it is the billions of dollars that the US government spends to have a stronghold in the region that they call the Middle East that has a much longer history. Yes, it is about the cross-training of law enforcement officers and officials here with law enforcement and the military and folks in Israel, in what is called Israel. Yes, it is about all of those things. But if you have political commitments to yourself being free as a Black person, that should be extended and can be extended because our ancestors have done it for a long time to the collective liberation of all people. And we cannot bring down the imperial beast that is the United States as long as there's no free Palestine, as long as there's no free Congo, as long as there's no free Sudan, as long as Haiti is not allowed to fulfill the promise that its ancestors fought for a long time ago, right? As Fannie Lou Hamer told us, none of us are free until all of us are free. So let's get this, y'all. Let's do it. Let's show up and let's continue to show up in this lifelong commitment for collective liberation. It's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be cute, but it is always, always going to be meaningful and necessary. So let's get it.
As they say, if we gonna do it, let's do it big then. Thank you so much, Charlene. I feel amped up. Let's hit the streets. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. We want to wind down and begin to close out. I want to have my dear sister, Erica Cross of the Dream Defenders, to share with us a song to close us out for this evening. And then we'll have a few next steps for y'all. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Erica. Yes, I do rep Dream Defenders, but I'm also in the South Florida area. I am just humbled to be here in solidarity with everyone and all of the information and knowledge and strength and love that has come through has been just amazing and uplifting and encouraging. And so I want to close us out with a song from sung by Sweet Honey in the Rock, but in the words of our dear Ella Baker, we who believe in freedom cannot, will not, shall not, forever not rest until it is won. So if you guys know the song, please join me, sing with me, be in spirit and solidarity with me as we continue to fight for liberation and freedom for all. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Until the killing of black men, black mother sons, is as important as the killing of white men, white mother sons. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. The older I get, the better I know the secret of my going on is when the reins are in the hands of the young who dare to run against the storm. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Thank you so much.
Ashe, dear sister, thank you so much for that. I want to also thank you again to our two incredible ASL interpreters, Vernice and Rodney of Accessible Integrated Media, Asmira, Yasmina, Curry, AG, Charlene, Paige, Jesse, Christian, Aisha, all of Black for Palestine for joining us this evening. To everyone who joined us this evening, this will not be our last webinar. As you exit out of the Zoom, if you could please put in the chat any ideas that you have for future webinars, for future actions. We're still building this thing. We need you. We need you. We need you. We need you. We need you in this. And so if you feel so inspired, please join us in these efforts. Thank you again so much for coming out. And thank you, Gerald Lenore, as well, for sharing that beautiful poem. Thank you. Have a good evening.